Hello everyone and welcome back to another one of the worst videos on the World Wide Web. I'm Smol Goth and today I'm here in my government mandated Wednesday Addams dress. Recently I had a green screen, so we're gonna be playing around with that a little bit. And happy Halloween everyone! Hopefully this video is coming out on time. This is intended to come out on Halloween, and in honor of spooky season we're gonna be reading some books from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is the Treasury edition with all 3 books. And in the background we're going to be playing the time-lapses of the last week of SmolTober. Yeah, it's been fun getting all those done, but it's time to wrap things up, so without further ado, let's get that rolling. So for those of you that don't know, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was a Scholastic book series that was published, I don't even know when, but it came out around when I was in elementary school. And a lot of people know it because of the artwork throughout the book. Now, the artwork is by Stephen Gammell, and all the stories in it are retold by Alvin Schwartz. They did an amazing job. Eventually, the Scholastic School Board stuff decided that this was too scary for kids, and they changed all of the artwork. Why? So we're going to be going through and just reading some little ones that I picked out. I'm going to be showing you guys the artwork for them. A lot of them I chose based on the artwork because it's just really, really cool, really interesting. And it's all ink work, so it works. It's Inktober, it's ink artwork. So we're going to be having a fun time and watching me struggle to read. Alright, we're going to be starting with one of the most iconic stories from the book, The Preacher. There's the artwork. I'll try to put it full screen if I can. If not, oh well. But yeah, this is the cover of the Treasury. It's the most well-known drawing out of this. And now you guys get to watch me struggle to read it. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest in a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. Then, it sounded like someone was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, but there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened his Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on a chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again. Step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do, then just faded out. The preacher waited and waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again. Slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob turned slowly, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quietly. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, the flesh dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets. She had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing. She told how her love had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig out their bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger on her left hand and lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where the money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and sunk down into the floor, and she was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the old house at midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hurt rock. He did, and he found a stack of money. And where the haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. This next one has some pretty simple art, just a couple gargoyle headstones, and it is called Room for One More. A man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with his friends in the big house that they owned outside the city. That night they had a good time visiting, but when Blackwell went to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him. When Blackwell saw his hideous face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There's room for one more." And then he waited a minute or two and drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened. "You're dreaming," he said. "I must have been," he said. But it didn't seem like a dream. After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting outside for an elevator to take him back down to the street. When it arrived, it looked very crowded. One of the passengers looked out and called to him. "There's room for one more," he said. It was the driver of the hearse. "No, thank you," Blackwell said. "I'll get the next one." The doors closed, and the elevator slowed down. There was shrieking and screaming, and the sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft, and everyone aboard was killed. Alright, this is another one that was always creepy to me as a kid. Again, the art's really, really simple, just 3 dudes sitting there. And this one is called The Man in the Middle. It was almost midnight. Sally Truitt had just gotten on the subway train to 50th Street after visiting her mother. "Don't worry," Sally told her. "The subway's safe. There's always policemen on duty." But that night, she didn't see one. Except for her, the subway car was empty. At 42nd Street, 3 tough-looking men got on. 2 of them were holding up the third, who looked drunk. His head rolled from side to side and his legs refused to work. When they got him seated between them, he came to a rest on one of their shoulders. Sally thought he was staring at her. She buried her head in a book and tried not to notice. At 28th Street, one of the men stood up. "Take it easy, Jim," he said to the man in the middle, and he got off. At 23rd Street, Jim's other friend stood up. "You'll be fine," he said, and he got off. Now the only ones left in the car were Jim and Sally. Just then, the train went around a sharp curve, and Jim pitched to the floor at Sally's feet. When she looked down at him, she saw a trickle of blood on the side of his head. Just above it, a bullet hole. Alright, this next one is another one that I chose for the art. This is an absolutely beautiful ink drawing. I'm just so in love with it. This story is called Bess. John Nicholas raised horses. He had many horses of all kinds, but his favorite was Bess, a gentle old mare he had grown up with. He no longer rode her, for all she could do now was just amble along. Bess spent her days grazing peacefully in the meadow. That summer, for the fun of it, John Nicholas went to a fortune-teller booth. The fortune-teller studied her cards. "I see danger ahead for you," she said. "Your favorite horse will cause you to die. I don't know when, but it will happen. It's in the cards." John Nicholas laughed. The idea that Bess would cause his death was nonsense. She was as dangerous as a bowl of soup. Yet from then on, whenever he saw her, he remembered the fortune-teller's warning. That fall, a farmer on the other end of the county asked if he could have Bess. He had been thinking that the old horse would be perfect for his children to ride. "It's a good idea," said John. "It would be fun for them, and it would give Bess something to do." Later, John told his wife about it. "Now Bess won't kill me," he said, and they both laughed. A few months later, he saw the farmer who had taken Bess. "How is she?" he asked. "Oh, she was fine for a while," the farmer said. "The children loved her, but then she got sick. I had to shoot her and put her out of her misery. It was a real shame." Despite himself, John breathed a heavy sigh of relief. He had often wondered if in some crazy way, through some strange accident, Bess would kill him. Now, of course, she couldn't. "I'd really like to see her," he said. "Just to say goodbye. She was my favorite." The bones of the dead horse were in the far corner of the man's farm. John kneeled down and patted Bess's sun-bleached skull. But then, a rattlesnake, who had made its home inside the skull, sank its fangs into John Nicholas's arm and killed him. Alright, this is one that no one really talks about. The art on this is really wicked. It's absolutely beautiful. This is one of the more funny, lighthearted stories with a happier ending than most of them. Half the stories are just the protagonist dies, but this one is just a cute little story, and it's called No Thanks. Thursday nights, Jim worked as a stock boy out in one of the malls on the highway. By 8:30 he was usually finished and drove home. But one night, Jim was one of the last to leave. By the time he got out to the huge parking lot, it was almost empty. The only sounds were the cars in the distance and his footsteps on the pavement. Suddenly, a man stepped out of the shadows. "Hey, mister," he called in a low voice. He held out his right hand. Balanced in the palm was a long, thin blade of a knife. Jim stopped. "Nice, sharp knife," the man said. "Don't panic," Jim thought. The man stepped towards him. "Don't run," Jim told himself. "Nice, sharp knife," the man repeated. "Give him what he wants," Jim thought. The man came closer. He held the knife up. "Cut's nice and easy," he said slowly. Jim waited. The man peered into his face. "Hey man, only $3. 2 for $5. Nice present for your mama." "No thanks," Jim said. "She got one." And he ran for his car. Alright, again, this is one of the really, really iconic ones, and it's also one of the fun stories that's in here. Starts off scary, gets cute. So this one is called Is Something Wrong? A car broke down late at night way out in the country. The driver remembered passing an empty house a few minutes earlier. "I'll stay there," he thought. "At least I'll get some sleep." He found some wood in the corner of a living room and made himself a fire in the fireplace. He covered himself in his coat and slept. Toward morning the fire went out, and the cold awakened him. It'll be light soon, he thought. Then he'll go for help. He closed his eyes again, but before he could doze off there was a terrible crash. Something big and heavy had fallen out of the chimney. It lay on the floor for a minute. Then it stood up and stared down at him. The man took one look and started running. He had never seen anything so horrible in his life. He paused just long enough to jump through a window, and then he ran and ran and ran until he thought his lungs would burst. As he stood in the road panting, trying to catch his breath, he felt something tap him on the shoulder. He turned and found himself staring at the two big, bloody eyes and the grinning skull. It was the horrible thing. "Pardon me," it said. "Is something wrong?" we go with another super iconic drawing. This one was actually one of the ones featured in the movie adaptation of this book, which is actually surprisingly good for a movie adaptation, especially of an anthology. I was really surprised. If you get the chance, check it out. It's really cool. This one is called The Dream. Lucy Morgan was an artist. She had spent a week painting in the small country town and decided the next day she would move on. She would go to a village called Kingston. But late that night, Lucy Morgan had a strange dream. She dreamed that she was walking up a dark, carved staircase and entered a bedroom. It was an ordinary room except for two things. The carpet was made up of large squares that looked like trapdoors, and each of the windows was fastened shut with big nails that stuck up out of the wood. In her dream, Lucy Morgan went to sleep in that bedroom. During the night, a woman with a pale face and black eyes and long black hair came into the room. She leaned over the bed and whispered, "This is an evil place. Flee while you can." The woman touched her arm and told her to hurry along. Lucy Morgan wakened from her dream with a shriek. She lay awake the rest of the night, trembling. In the morning, she told her landlady that she had decided not to go to Kingston after all. "I can't tell you why," she said, "but I just can't bring myself to go there." "Then why don't you go to Dorset?" the landlady said. "It's a pretty town and it isn't too far." So Lucy Morgan went down to Dorset. Someone told her that she could find a room in a house at the top of a hill. It was a pleasant-looking house, and the landlady there, a plump, motherly woman, was as nice as could be. "Let's look at the room," she said. "I think you'll like it." They walked up the dark, carved staircase, like the one in Lucy's dream. In these old houses, the staircases are all the same, Lucy thought. But when the landlady opened the door to the bedroom, it was the room in her dream, with the same carpet that looked like trapdoors and the same windows fastened with big nails. "It's just a coincidence," Lucy told herself. "How do you like it?" the landlady asked. "I'm not too sure," she said. "Well, take your time," the landlady said. "I'll bring up some tea while you think about it." Lucy sat on the bed staring at the trapdoors and the big nails. Soon there was a knock on the door. "It's the landlady with tea," she thought. But it wasn't the landlady. It was the woman with the pale face and the black eyes and the long black hair. Lucy Morgan grabbed her things and fled. Alright, we have one more funny one and then we're going to end with a poem. This is The Viper. A widow lived alone on the top floor of an apartment house. One morning her telephone rang. "Hello," she said. "This is the Viper," a man said. "I am coming up." Somebody's fooling around, she thought, and hung up. A half hour later the telephone rang. It was the same man. "It's the Viper," he said. "I will be up soon." The widow didn't know what to think, but she was getting frightened. Once more the telephone rang. Again, it was the Viper. "I am coming up now," he said. She quickly called the police, and they said they would be right over. When the doorbell rang, she sighed with relief. "They're here," she thought. But when she opened the door, there stood a little man with a bucket and a cloth. "I am the Viper," he said. "I wish to wash and wipe the windows." Finally, we have this last poem. There's not a whole lot of art to go with it, but I just think it's a really nice place to end it off for the night. This is A Man Who Lived in Leeds. Some say this rhyme doesn't mean anything. Others are not so sure. There was a man who lived in Leeds. He filled his garden full of seeds. And when the seeds began to grow, it was like a garden filled with snow. But when the snow began to melt, it was like a ship without a belt. And when the ship began to sail, it was like a bird without a tail. And when that bird began to fly, it was like an eagle in the sky. And when the sky began to roar, it was like a lion at my door. And when the door began to crack, it was like a penknife in my back. and then my back began to bleed. I was dead, dead, dead indeed. So anyway, enough with the dramatic stuff. I wanted to thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. And just to let you know, this isn't tea that I'm drinking, this is a Red Bull because it's currently 2 in the morning while I'm recording this. But I wanted to make it look fancy for the atmosphere. So that was the Scary Stories Treasury, just some of my favorite books with my favorite art. This book is a huge reason on why I am the way I am, why I make the art that I make, why I enjoy the things that I enjoy. If you guys enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you guys left a like, left comments, even subscribed if you really want to see more. I probably won't be doing more story readings unless you guys actually really enjoyed this. I'm not the best at reading. I have a lot to learn, I have a lot of progress that I can make. But if you guys enjoyed it, I wouldn't mind learning and growing and doing more of these, because this is really fun. Thank you guys again. If you would like, you can also follow my social media in the description. I have an Instagram, Twitter, a DeviantArt, and I have a Discord server which is going to be going public next month. So stick around, stay tuned. There's going to be tons more content coming up. As always, stay safe, stay scary, and we'll see you next time. Bye.